Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the news from the global economy. Coming up on today's program, Israeli high-tech off to a booming start in 2015. And Iraq carefully leaves an 8-year curfew behind. First, the headlines. Chancellor Angela Merkel threw cold water on a push by Greece's new government to end its bailout and strike a new financing deal with its creditors. Speaking in Washington, D.C., Merkel said the current program forms the basis of any discussions that we have. Greece faces uncertainty over its ability to fund itself after its EU IMF bailout expires on February 28, and failure to come to an agreement could lead to a forced exit from the Eurozone. Japan's finance minister at a gathering of G20 finance ministers and central bankers in Istanbul had the following comment.
They've already said that they'll do these sort of financial austerity measures, and so just because someone won an election, it won't work to suddenly go back on all of the promises that have been made up until now.
U.S. stocks fell on Monday as investors worried about Greek debt negotiations, and the National Bank of Greece's U.S.-listed shares fell 7.4%. The focus is now on a proposal that Greece is expected to bring to the table at an emergency meeting of Eurozone finance ministers on Wednesday. EU foreign ministers on Monday agreed to widen sanctions, but decided to wait until next Monday to give peace efforts more time. The leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany will meet in Minsk, Belarus on Wednesday to try to broker a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. Should that attempt fail, the EU will set visa bans and asset freezes on more Ukrainian separatists and Russians. But U.S. President Barack Obama said the U.S. would consider sending weapons to Ukraine if negotiations fail.
The principle of these sanctions for Mariupol remains, but the implementation will depend on the situation on the ground.
The corruption scandal at Brazilian oil group Petrobras has, for the first time since its outbreak, implicated international investors. 2 major Singaporean shipbuilders and 3 Brazilian companies with Japanese shareholders have been accused of paying the state-controlled group bribes. Under the bribes for contract scheme, the shipbuilders allegedly paid kickbacks worth 0.9% to a range of officials. Bribe recipients may include the treasurer of Brazil's ruling Workers' Party and a range of Petrobras and Sete Brasil officials.
There
were huge diversions of money from within Petrobras, which in one way or another ended up benefiting the party. Rousseff tried to distance herself from this, pleading innocent. But it seems from the polls that were conducted that the population was unconvinced and holds the president responsible for the corruption scandals involving Petrobras.
Qualcomm agreed to pay Beijing a fine of $975 million, the largest in China's corporate history, ending an investigation into anti-competitive practices. The deal also requires Qualcomm to lower its royalty rates on patents used in China, likely helping local smartphone makers such as Xiaomi and Huawei. The antitrust probe clouded Qualcomm's opportunities in China and contributed to problems in collecting royalty payments from device makers. Qualcomm will now offer licenses to its current 3G and 4G essential Chinese patents, widely used by Chinese device makers. For phones sold in China, Qualcomm will calculate royalties based on 65% of the phone's selling price rather than the whole price. Canon is buying Sweden's Axis Communications for $2.8 billion in the Japanese camera maker's biggest ever acquisition. Canon agreed to buy all shares of video surveillance equipment company Axis for almost 50% more than the stock's Monday closing price. Canon, the world's largest camera maker, has been diversifying its printer business with additional services as the traditional camera business declines. Revenue from camera sales fell the last 3 fiscal years, while sales of office products, including printers and peripherals, gained. The startup nation has had an impressive start in 2015. During the last week of January, Israeli startups raised $910 million through acquisitions and funding rounds. With us in the studio to discuss some Israeli success stories is Channel 2 economic journalist Noah Oron. Mr. Oron. Miss Aran, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Benjamin. So I want to start off with the content recommendation field. So you know when you scroll down a website, usually you would see at the bottom this line that says more content that you will be interested in, or you would also want to read this or that. So this field is very profitable, and two of the major players in this field are actually Israelis. These are two very important companies that have raised a lot of money so far, and they're reportedly planning to hold an IPO. Each one will hold an IPO soon, and I want to tell you a little bit about both. The first one is Outbrain. This was founded in 2006 by Yaron Galai and Ori Lahav. They have raised $99 million so far to this date. They have 400 employees, and the company is based in 11 cities so far.
What does Outbrain do exactly? I mean,
so basically what they do is they have created some sort of a service. I mean, they found an algorithm that recognizes what you like, and then it will send you to a different website or keep you on the same news website that you're already reading.
Okay.
And what Taboola does is very similar to that. Taboola is also a very big company in this field. It was founded in 2007 by Adam Singolda, just a year after Outbrain, but it has grown a lot so far. They have raised $157 million so far, and just last week they raised 117. So that's a very big jump for this company. Both of the companies are currently valuated at about $1 billion, so that's a big number. And if they're going to an IPO, each of them is going to an IPO, so that will be an even greater competition between the two, and it will be interesting to see what happens next. Taboola is a little bit smaller than Outbrain. It has about 200 employees, only in 5 cities around the globe, but it's growing very, very fast. It actually recently won a prize for being the fastest growing company in Israel. So that's very, very interesting. And there's a great competition between the two, and we'll see what happens next, especially after the IPOs. So then I want to move on to another field that's very interesting in the past few weeks, and in general, it's one of my favorite fields when it comes to what technology can do in order to help other people, especially the disabled. And I want to tell you a little bit about Sesame. That's an Israeli company that recently won a $1 million prize in a competition held by Verizon. And this can show us how global players are becoming more and more interested in this kind of technology. So what Sesame Enable does, it created a touch-free smartphone interface, and that enables people to control their smartphones or their tablets just using their voice or just small head movements, and that's very, very helpful to those who really are completely paralyzed and cannot move even their hands or their body at all. It basically allows them to send a text message or call someone, and that's very, very big for people with disabilities. This company was founded in 2012 by Oded Bendov. He was approached by Giro Livne, who's paralyzed from the neck and down. Livne basically approached Bendov and told him, I want to be able to send a text message by myself. I don't want anyone to do this for me. And this is how this company was founded. Another company who also won a prize in the same competition held by Verizon is VoiceIt, and this company created an app that basically understands impaired speech and translates it into regular speech. So these people can just talk to anyone. They've also used Chris Fonseca. I don't know if you know him. He's a comedian, and he used the app and created a whole comedy show. Just by, translating his jokes to the audience. So this shows us how big this is. Lastly, if we're talking about helping people with disabilities, I can't not mention Rewalk. Rewalk,
of course. Right.
One of the biggest Israeli startups when it comes to this field. I don't know if you've seen it on Glee. It was featured on Glee.
Actually, I must admit, I did see it on Glee.
So yeah, we all have seen it on Glee. And it was very big. What they do is they have created an exoskeleton which enables paralyzed people to walk, just to stand up on their feet and walk, which is amazing. It's already sold in 9 countries, and each one of those cost $70,000. That's a lot of money for each one, and the company has raised more than $18 million so far, which is quite big, but this is a big, big, big solution.
Big business. Noah Aran, Thank you so very much for joining us from Channel 2 and giving us more information on these incredibly expansive technologies coming out of Israel, enabling people to actually go beyond their limitations. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We go on now to a completely different story. We end up in Iraq, where a midnight to 5 a.m. curfew that has limited Baghdadis for the past 8 years was recently abolished in hopes of boosting the economy. But as the government seeks more normalcy, time will tell whether the city is ready to move past years of terrorism. I-24 News reporter Daniel Roth has more.
This weekend, the curfew over Baghdad, which made commercial movement on everything from deliveries to nightclubs harder, was ended. The Iraqi capital has had some form of curfew since the U.S.-led invasion took place more than a decade ago. The midnight to 5 a.m. curfew had been in place since 2007.
This is something good for me because there are areas in Baghdad where people work in the evening and people go out in the evening.
We are not scared, and this is a very good step for us. Businesses can remain open, and people who have anything they need to do at night can now do it. We will no longer have to worry at racing back home to get there before curfew. God willing, we will have security.
Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi announced the end of the curfew to much jubilation, according to the Reuters report. This is part of a broader motion forward to normalize life amid violence to the extent that it can be, with the hope of spurring activity, economic and otherwise.
Baghdad is a city of ghosts, and this is what we see when we return late at night, and the checkpoints prevent us from entering our areas. But when the curfew is off, the city becomes more vital and alive, and people are wandering around and shopping. As a citizen, one feels safe.
To celebrate, a crowd gathered at Tahrir Square, though the kind of peace and calm that commerce tends to thrive in may still be a long way off. Just hours before the curfew was lifted, a number of bombs went off in the city, taking the lives of 37, mostly civilians.
And we stay in the Middle East as I-24 News reporter Ayman Siksak joins us now for a look at the economy in Iraq, Libya, and Saudi Arabia in Financial Bazaar. Ayman, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Binyamin.
So, Iraq. What are we going to talk about in Iraq, considering we just saw a report?
Well, interesting news from Iraq, not as sad as we just saw. It's always interesting. In a very dramatic situation, there's always those who see the good in the bad. Foreign investors just told the National magazine that the past year in Iraq, with the deepening of the crisis, has actually provided golden opportunities for them to invest in Iraqi stocks on the Iraqi Stock Exchange and make a killing, basically.
Yeah.
But this is specifically for those who have lots of patience and are willing to play the long-term game.
Okay.
So we're talking specifically about the Iraqi banking sector that, despite huge losses, is actually providing good yields, about 10% yields for foreign investors. So it seems that this past year has been marked mainly by foreign investors investing in the Iraqi banking sector, which you wouldn't expect at this time.
Aren't the risks relatively high, considering what we just saw? You know, they finished the curfew, but a few hours before, there was a terrorist attack.
The risks are relatively high in other sectors, but it seems that the banking industry in Iraq has been rather stable.
Yeah.
And again, this is only if you're willing to wait a while to see return from your money.
Okay. And, I mean, is it coincidence that we see basically the army going in, you know, causing mayhem, so to speak, and then you know, investors going right after? There are some theories out there that believe that this is not entirely coincidental.
Well, you know, there's so many conspiracy theories about the U.S.'s involvement or intentions in the war in Iraq, and this, of course, has also to do with oil, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, you know, this is greater than us. We can't know the hidden motives behind this.
Right.
What we do know is that this war, this ongoing war in Iraq, has been profitable for many foreign powers.
Okay, clearly. Now, let's move on to Libya.
Yes. Well, Libya is in much sadder news than this. And not that the Iraqi news were great for Iraqis, but Libyans are really suffering at this time of year. World powers, especially the U.S. and a few European allies, published a statement saying that if the oil price drop continues, and we know that it's dropped 60% in the past 6 months, Libya's economy in its entirety faces bankruptcy. So really bad news for Libya. This has been coming for a while. It's no surprise to anyone that's been following the news. And this is because Libya, more than any of the other OPEC countries, is hugely dependent on its oil industry. And of course, with the raging war between...
The political situation as it is, the fact that it's split in two,
exactly,
makes it even more.
Exactly. And the rebels there are taking over several of the oil fields, making the situation even more complicated.
Okay, lastly, last comment. Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, gas prices have plummeted to 45 cents a gallon. I mean, we remember just a year ago, there was panic in the U.S. when prices rocketed to $4 a gallon. Yeah. So in Saudi Arabia, they're plummeting. But Saudi Arabians are unfazed. They're doing better than Libya in this case. They have diversified their economy somewhat, but that's only because Saudi Arabia is well cushioned in reserves.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ayman Siksak, for
Thank
giving
you
us more on Saudi Arabia, Libya, and Iraq. That concludes our Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Changal Fares. Thanks for watching, and we'll have more for you tomorrow.